He was a 62-year-old fisherman from Lake Crescent, Washington, a place where the fog rolls low at dawn and the waters hide secrets no one wants to disturb. Early one cold morning, while checking his trout lines, he noticed something odd, an old frayed rope floating quietly, moving as if something deep below was pulling on it. No one could explain how it got there, and the way it shifted against the current made him pause, heart thumping. When the authorities finally arrived to see what lay at the other end, they turned pale. Their voices hushed against the vast silence of the lake. Some even stepped back, refusing to get closer. Would you dare to pull this rope from the bottom of the lake if it called to you? Let me know what you think below, and if you want to hear more stories that the water keeps hidden, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. His name was Walter Griggs, a 62-year-old fisherman with sun-hardened hands and the kind of eyes that always seemed to scan the water even when he wasn't looking. Walter had fished Lake Crescent nearly every day since he was 17, leaving his small wooden cabin before dawn, sliding his weather-beaten boat across the mirror-still water while the mist still curled above the surface like pale smoke. The lake was deep, over 600 feet in places, and locals often said it felt bottomless, hiding secrets in its cold embrace. Walter never believed in ghost stories, but even he admitted the lake had a way of swallowing things without ever giving them back. That morning had felt like any other. He checked his nets, humming low, the oars creaking in their rusted locks, the cold morning air carrying the scent of pine and wet stone. The sky was an unbroken gray, heavy and silent, making each splash of water sound louder than it should have. Walter had a thermos of black coffee at his feet, taking slow sips between pulling in lines, careful not to spill a drop on the old wood beneath him. He planned to catch enough trout to trade in town before lunch, and maybe spend the afternoon fixing the fence near the cabin, something he'd been putting off. It was when he turned the boat near the northern edge of the lake, close to the place locals called the Drop, because of how the ground beneath the water suddenly disappeared into darkness, that he noticed it. At first, he thought it was just a log drifting lazily, but as he got closer, Walter saw it was a rope, floating strangely upright, as if something below was pulling at it gently, swaying with an unnatural rhythm against the small ripples on the surface. The rope was old, thick, frayed at the end, with algae clinging to it in long green strands that swayed like hair. It was the kind of rope you might find tied to a dock or the anchor of a larger boat, but out here, floating in the deepest part of Lake Crescent, it didn't belong. Walter stopped rowing, letting the boat drift closer, eyes narrowing as he studied the rope. The air around him felt heavier, the silence pressing into his ears, broken only by the slow creak of the boat against the gentle water. He reached out and touched the rope with the tip of his paddle, watching it sway, but it didn't drift away as a loose rope would. It remained, pulling back slightly, tension humming along its length, as if something far below was holding it in place. A cold shiver moved down Walter's spine. He had seen many odd things on the lake. Old fishing traps, tree branches that had sunk and returned to the surface, even the occasional piece of wreckage from storms long past. But he had never seen a rope like this, standing upright in water that deep, refusing to let go of whatever it was tied to below. For a moment, Walter considered leaving it alone. Maybe it was tied to a log stuck on the bottom, or maybe it was a part of some old fishing gear that had come loose. But as he looked at it, swaying, the mist curling low around the water's surface, he felt something inside him push forward, a strange curiosity that made his hand reach out again, this time to grip the rope lightly. The rope was slimy under his fingers, algae coating it in a slick film, and it smelled of lake water and something else, something older and metallic, like rusted iron. Walter pulled gently, and to his surprise, the rope moved a few inches upward before catching on something below. The boat shifted, rocking gently, and Walter's eyes darted to the ripples that spread across the water, waiting, listening, feeling as if the lake itself was holding its breath. He pulled again, harder this time, and the rope came up another foot before stopping, tension pulling back, as if whatever was down there did not want to leave its resting place. Walter tied the rope to the metal cleat on the side of the boat, leaning back, watching it sway, the end dipping in and out of the water with each small wave. A part of him told him to leave it, to row away and never look back, but the other part, the part that had made him a fisherman all these years, told him that something was down there, something that was meant to be found. He sat back on the wooden bench of the boat, staring at the rope, the mist moving around him in soft coils. the lake's silence growing deeper as the sun tried to push through the heavy clouds above. Walter reached down, unhooking the small winch he used for heavier nets, and began to tie the rope to it, hands moving slowly, carefully, his breath steady, but his heart beginning to beat faster in his chest. It was in that quiet moment, the mist swirling and the lake holding its breath, that Walter realized this might be more serious than it seemed. This was not a piece of driftwood or an old fishing trap. The tension on the rope felt alive, like a memory reaching up from the darkness below, pulling at him with invisible hands. As he tested the weight, feeling it strain against the small winch, Walter's mind flickered to old stories he had heard in town. Stories of things lost in the lake, of boats that had disappeared without a trace, of people who had gone fishing and never returned. He had always thought them exaggerations, the kind of stories people told to give life to a quiet place. But now, as the rope pulled back against him, those stories did not feel so distant. He looked around, the mist making the trees on the shore look like dark sentinels watching from afar, the sky pressing low, heavy with unspoken words. Walter's hands tightened around the crank of the winch, and he began to turn it, the rope groaning, water dripping from it as it rose inch by inch, each creak of the winch echoing across the still water. The rope pulled back harder now, whatever was down there resisting, as if it was anchored to something heavy, something that did not want to rise to the surface. Walter leaned back, using his weight to keep the winch steady, breathing through his teeth, eyes fixed on the rope as it rose, foot by foot, the slime-covered coils falling into the bottom of the boat, the smell of rust and old water growing stronger. He stopped for a moment, letting the rope settle, the boat shifting slightly under the changing weight, and listened. The lake was silent, except for the soft slap of water against the hull, and the distant cry of a bird somewhere beyond the mist. He felt alone, deeply alone, as if the world had shrunk to this small boat, this rope, and the dark water below. Walter wiped his hands on his pants, smearing algae and lake water onto the faded fabric, and reached for the winch again. He felt it then, a sudden jerk on the rope, sharp and strong, pulling back with a force that made the winch spin backward a few inches, the handle slipping through his fingers and striking his knuckles. Walter hissed, grabbing the handle again, stopping the spin, heart pounding in his ears. The rope was alive now, moving slightly, a slow, rhythmic pull, like the heartbeat of something sleeping in the deep, something waking up. He looked at the rope, at the way it moved, the way it seemed to strain and relax, pulling against the boat with quiet insistence. Walter's breath came faster, a part of him wanting to cut the rope and leave, to row back to shore and forget he ever saw it. But another part, the deeper part that could not walk away from a mystery, held him there. He gripped the winch tighter, knuckles white, and began to turn it again. Slowly, steadily, the rope rising once more. As he worked, the mist began to lift slightly, the gray light of the morning revealing the dark waters around him, the trees on the shore standing silent and still. The rope rose higher, more of it coiling into the bottom of the boat, water dripping, the smell of rust and old lake water growing thicker, clinging to the cold air. Walter did not know how long he worked, the minutes blurring together, the sound of the winch and the creak of the rope the only sounds in the world. His arms ached, his back burned, but he kept turning, pulling the rope from the depths, foot by foot, the tension humming through the boat, vibrating in his bones. And then, with a soft splash, something broke the surface of the water, hidden beneath the last few feet of rope, rising slowly, heavy and dark, trailing algae and bubbles as it came. Walter's breath caught, his hands frozen on the winch, eyes wide as he saw it, half hidden beneath the cold water, the dark shape of something tied to the end of the rope, something that should not have been there. He reached for the boat hook, pulling it closer, using it to lift the object slightly, water streaming from it in dark rivulets, the algae sliding off in clumps, revealing the corroded metal surface beneath. It was heavy, far heavier than he expected, and it clanged softly against the side of the boat, a dull, hollow sound that echoed across the water, making Walter flinch. As he steadied it, leaning over the edge, he saw the object more clearly now. A large rusted metal box, about 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, with thick iron clasps corroded shut and barnacles clinging to its sides. The rope was tied tightly around it, knots so old they were fused with algae and rust, impossible to untie by hand. The box was dented in places, but it was sealed, the clasps holding firm, despite the years it must have spent in the cold darkness below. Walter sat back, breathing heavily, staring at the box, the mist swirling slowly around the boat, the lake silent once more. The rope still held tension, pulling gently, as if something below was reluctant to let go completely, but the box was out of the water now, resting heavily against the side of the boat. Water dripping from its edges, dark stains pooling at Walter's feet. His mind raced. What was this box? How long had it been down there, hidden in the depths of Lake Crescent, waiting for someone to find it? And why was it tied to a rope, anchored in the deepest part of the lake, hidden away from the world? Walter felt a chill move through him, the weight of the mystery pressing into his chest, making it hard to breathe. He reached out, touching the box, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers, the rough edges where rust had eaten away at the surface, the sharp edges of the barnacles clinging to it. It felt wrong, out of place, like something that belonged to another time, another life. He tried to move it further into the boat, but it was too heavy, forcing him to let it rest against the edge, half in, half out of the water, rocking gently with the movement of the boat. Walter sat back, looking around, the mist lifting slowly, the world returning in shades of gray and green, the silence of the lake pressing in once more. He felt alone, deeply alone, with the weight of the box and the mystery of the rope anchoring him to this moment, a moment he knew he could not walk away from now. He reached for his radio, the small black device he kept clipped to the side of the boat, and hesitated. Who would he call? Who would believe him if he told them what he had found, out here in the deep water, tied to an old rope in the middle of Lake Crescent? But he knew he could not leave it here, could not pretend he had never found it. Walter took a deep breath, pressing the button on the radio, his voice shaking slightly as he called for help, telling them where he was, telling them that he had found something heavy, something that needed to be seen. As he spoke, the mist finally cleared, revealing the still dark water around him, the trees on the shore, and the heavy rusted box tied to the rope, resting against his boat, waiting. And in that moment, as the cold wind moved across the surface of the lake, Walter knew that whatever was in that box, whatever secrets it held, would change everything. The wind picked up in small, chilling gusts, brushing against Walter's face as he waited for a response on the crackling radio. The sound of static filled the air between the lonely creaks of the boat, and for a moment, he thought no one would answer, that he would be left alone on the lake with a heavy, rusted box tied to the rope, rocking gently with each ripple. He glanced at it, the water streaming from its seams, dark lines forming on the boat's floor, mingling with bits of algae and the sharp scent of rust. The box seemed to stare back at him, as if it held a memory from the depths, something that had waited a very long time to be seen. Finally, a voice crackled back, distorted but familiar. "Walter, this is Deputy Harris. You all right out there?" The calm tone tried to hide the concern beneath, but it slipped through anyway, and Walter exhaled, realizing how tense his shoulders had become. "Harris, I found something. You need to come out here," Walter said, keeping his eyes on the box, as if it might slip back into the lake if he looked away. There was a pause on the other end, the kind that tells you someone is deciding whether you finally lost your mind or not. "What did you find, Walter?" Harris asked, voice cautious. "It's a box, heavy, tied down with this old rope out here by the drop. I pulled it up. You need to see it." Walter's voice was steady, but inside he could feel the gnawing unease spreading, the kind that creeps in when something normal suddenly becomes something you don't understand. Another pause. Then Harris replied, "All right, Walter. Stay put. I'll get the Coast Guard and head out. Don't try to open it." Walter let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Copy that." As he clipped the radio back, the reality of the situation settled in. He was alone again, the box dripping and shifting against the boat, the soft sound of water against metal filling the air. Walter pulled his coat tighter around him, the cold sinking deeper as the sun struggled to pierce the gray clouds. He kept glancing at the box, studying the barnacles crusted along its edges, the dents and the thick clasps that seemed fused shut with rust. The lake felt different now, the water darker, the trees on the shore standing in silent witness to what was unfolding. Walter's mind wandered to the possibilities. An old safe? Maybe a piece of history from when the lake had seen more traffic, a sunken treasure, or even evidence from one of the whispered stories that surrounded the lake's history. Stories of people who had gone missing without a trace, boats that were found drifting with no one aboard. But beneath the curiosity, there was fear too. A fear that whatever was inside that box would change the lake forever, and perhaps change him too. Walter reached out and touched the box again, pressing his palm against the cold, damp metal. He felt the texture of the rust, the sharp barnacles, and beneath it all, the solid, unyielding weight of the unknown. He pulled his hand back and wiped it on his pants, leaving a dark smear. Time moved slowly as he waited, the boat rocking gently, the sound of water lapping against the hull becoming a rhythm that matched the slow, uneasy beat of his heart. He tried to distract himself by checking his nets, but his eyes kept drifting back to the box. The rope coiled like a dead snake in the bottom of the boat, dripping and silent. At one point, a fish jumped nearby, the splash loud in the stillness, making Walter flinch, his eyes darting around the lake before returning to the box. It was as if the lake itself was watching, waiting to see what he would do next. Then, in the distance, the sound of a boat engine broke the silence, low and steady, growing louder as it approached through the lifting mist. Walter stood, careful not to tip the boat, and saw the shape of a larger boat cutting through the water, the insignia of the local Coast Guard clear on the side, with Deputy Harris standing near the bow, scanning the water until his eyes found Walter. They approached slowly, the engine cutting down to a low rumble as they came alongside Walter's boat. Harris, a man in his late 40s with a face weathered by years of work and the kind of calm that came from dealing with all manner of small-town emergencies, looked at Walter, then at the box. "That it?" Harris asked, his eyes narrowing. "That's it," Walter replied, his voice low. Harris and one of the Coast Guard officers, a younger man named Rivera, secured the boats together, their practiced movements breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the lake. Harris leaned over, inspecting the box without touching it, his eyes taking in the rust, the rope, the dark water still dripping from its edges. "Looks heavy," Harris remarked. "It is," Walter confirmed. "It pulled back when I tried to bring it up, like it didn't want to come." Harris glanced at Walter, studying his face for a moment before nodding. "Let's get a look at it." They brought out a small portable crane from the Coast Guard boat, hooking it to the rope Walter had tied around the box, the device whirring softly as it lifted the heavy object fully out of the water and into the Coast Guard boat with a dull thud that echoed across the water. Walter stepped carefully into their boat, his eyes never leaving the box as it lay there, dripping, the smell of old lake water and rust mixing with the cold air. Rivera circled the box, checking the clasps, testing them with a gloved hand. "These are fused shut. We're going to need tools to get this open." Harris nodded, looking at Walter. "You have any idea what's in it?" Walter shook his head. "No, I just found the rope and something told me to pull it up." Harris studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's get this back to the dock. We'll take it from there." As they turned the boat back toward shore, the weight of what they were carrying seemed to settle over all of them. A heavy, silent presence that no one wanted to speak about just yet. The lake passed by slowly, the trees along the shore moving like dark shadows as they approached the dock, the water trailing behind them in soft ripples. When they arrived, a few people had gathered, drawn by the unusual sight of the Coast Guard boat returning with something heavy and rusted on board. Walter stepped onto the dock, watching as Harris and Rivera worked to secure the box, moving it carefully onto a wheeled cart they had brought down from the small station near the dock. They moved it into the storage shed, the sound of the metal scraping against the concrete floor as they set it down, the smell of rust and lake water filling the air. The shed was cold, the walls lined with equipment, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above them. Rivera brought over a heavy crowbar and a small cutting tool, looking to Harris for approval before beginning to work on the clasps. Sparks flew as the cutting tool bit into the rusted metal, the harsh light flickering across the shed, illuminating the focused faces of the men and the dark, wet surface of the box. Walter stood back, his hands in his pockets, watching as the clasps finally gave way with a loud snap, the sound echoing in the shed, making everyone flinch slightly. Rivera set the tools down, breathing heavily, and looked at Harris. Harris nodded, stepping forward. He hesitated for a moment, then reached down, gripping the edge of the box's lid, and slowly, carefully, lifted it open. A cold draft seemed to move through the shed, the air shifting as the lid creaked open, revealing the darkness inside. Walter leaned forward, trying to see, his breath caught in his throat. his eyes straining to adjust to the shadow within the box. And then they saw it. Inside the box, wrapped in layers of what looked like oilcloth and old canvas, was something large, metallic, and oddly shaped, with parts of it glinting dully in the fluorescent light. Harris reached in, pulling back the layers slowly, revealing more of the object, the smell of old oil and rust filling the air. Walter took a step closer, his eyes widening as the shape became clearer. A large, corroded piece of machinery, intricate gears and levers fused with rust, parts of it marked with numbers and letters that were barely visible beneath the grime. "What the hell is that?" Rivera whispered, his voice barely audible. Harris didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the markings, his brow furrowed. He reached out, wiping away some of the grime with his gloved hand, revealing a symbol beneath, an eagle clutching arrows, with faded letters surrounding it. Walter felt a chill move through him as he saw it, recognizing the symbol from history books, from documentaries he had watched late at night. It was the symbol of the United States military, but old, from another era. "It's military," Harris said quietly, his voice uncertain. "Old." Walter swallowed, his mind racing. What was this doing at the bottom of Lake Crescent, tied to a rope, hidden in a rusted box? Rivera looked at Harris, concern flickering across his face. "Should we call it in?" Harris nodded slowly. "Yeah, we're going to need someone from the state to look at this. Maybe even federal." As they stepped back, the object inside the box seemed to stare back at them, its gears frozen, its levers still, holding secrets from a time long past. Secrets that had been hidden beneath the cold waters of Lake Crescent for who knows how long. Walter stood there, feeling the weight of the moment, the cold air pressing in around him, the shed silent except for the soft dripping of water from the box. He knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning, that whatever they had found was part of something much larger, something that would not remain hidden for long, now that it had been brought to the surface. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the smell of rust and old water, with the box open before them, Walter realized that his life, and the quiet life of Lake Crescent, would never be the same again. The shed seemed smaller now, the cold air pressing in tighter around them as the reality of what lay before them began to take shape. Harris stood with his hands on his hips, staring down at the open box, the dull glint of the corroded gears and levers reflecting in his eyes. Rivera shifted uneasily beside him, his breath visible in the cold, mixing with the faint steam rising from the wet box. Walter couldn't pull his gaze away. The symbol on the metal, the eagle clutching arrows, was a ghost from history, whispering of stories buried under layers of time and mud at the bottom of Lake Crescent. He could almost hear the echo of those whispers in the corners of the shed, beneath the soft dripping of water and the low hum of the lights above them. "What do you think it is?" Rivera asked, his voice low, breaking the silence. Harris didn't answer immediately. He crouched down, studying the gears and levers, the rusted joints and the markings barely visible beneath grime and barnacle scars. He reached out, tapping a part of the mechanism gently with a gloved finger, listening to the hollow sound it made. Walter stepped closer, his curiosity outweighing the cold uncertainty that still gnawed at his mind. "Looks like some kind of machinery, maybe a part of a plane or a boat engine." Harris shook his head slowly, eyes narrowing as he studied the markings. "No, this isn't just any machinery. This is precision work, military like we thought, but old. World War II era, maybe." Rivera glanced at Harris, then at Walter. "How would something like this end up at the bottom of Lake Crescent, tied to a rope like that? Who would leave it there?" That question hung heavy in the air, unanswered, as all three of them stood around the box, the object within holding its silence as if it, too, was deciding whether to share its secrets. Harris stood up, pulling off his gloves and rubbing his forehead. "We need to call this in. Get someone from the state out here to take a look. Maybe even someone from the Historical Preservation Office, or the military if it comes to that." Walter's eyes never left the box, even as he nodded slowly. "I don't know what it is, Harris, but it was pulling back when I tried to bring it up, like it didn't want to come." Rivera frowned. "Or like something else was holding it down." They all fell silent again, the drip of water from the box tapping against the concrete floor like a ticking clock, counting down to something none of them could yet see. As they moved the box carefully onto a heavier cart, preparing to secure it in the small locked room at the back of the station until authorities arrived, Walter felt the weight of what they were handling. not just in its physical heaviness, but in the unseen gravity of its history. Every scrape of the metal against the cart, every clink of the rusted gears as they shifted, seemed to echo with a past demanding to be remembered. They locked the room, the thick door closing with a heavy click that seemed too loud in the quiet of the station. Harris turned, looking at Walter, his expression serious. "You did the right thing, Walter, but I need you to keep this quiet until we know what we're dealing with. Can you do that?" Walter nodded, though inside he wasn't sure how he would keep something like this to himself. The lake had given up a secret, and now that secret was alive in his mind, refusing to be ignored. Rivera glanced between them. "Should we set a guard?" Harris thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I'll stay tonight." As Walter left the station, stepping back into the cold air of the late afternoon, the sky over Lake Crescent was turning darker, heavy clouds rolling in as if the weather itself was aware of what had been found beneath its waters. The lake looked the same, calm and dark, the trees along the edge standing still. But to Walter it felt different now, like the water was hiding a story, and he had just pulled the first sentence out from its depths. That night, Walter sat in his cabin, the wood stove crackling as he tried to warm the chill that seemed to have sunk into his bones. He kept seeing the box in his mind, the rusted gears, the faint markings, the way the rope had resisted as he pulled, the tension that had felt almost alive. He wondered what secrets it held, what history had been tied to the bottom of the lake, hidden in the darkness for decades. He thought of the stories he had heard over the years, fishermen who had seen shadows moving beneath the water, hikers who said they heard strange noises near the lake at night, the tale of a plane that was rumored to have gone down during a storm in the 1940s and was never found, the pilot and crew vanishing without a trace. Was it connected to that? Was the box a piece of that lost plane? Or was it something else entirely? Something more secret, hidden away intentionally, tied down to ensure it would never be found? The questions swirled in his mind as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of his cabin. He found himself glancing toward the lake, even though it was out of sight in the darkness, as if he could feel its presence, waiting, silent, hiding the rest of the truth somewhere beneath its cold, dark surface. In the morning, Walter went back to the station, unable to stay away. Harris was there, looking tired but alert, a thermos of coffee in his hand as he sat near the locked room. He nodded to Walter as he entered, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the weight of what they were guarding clear between them. "Anything happen?" Walter asked quietly. Harris shook his head. Quiet. Too quiet. They unlocked the room, checking the box, making sure it was still there, still closed, still holding its secrets. It was, but the air in the room felt heavier, as if the box's presence was pushing against the walls, demanding to be understood. A few hours later, two men arrived in an unmarked vehicle, their clothes plain, but their demeanor sharp, eyes scanning the station and the people within it with the calm authority of those used to being in control. They introduced themselves as representatives from the state's Historical Preservation Office, but Walter noticed the way they carried themselves, the way they studied the box, the questions they asked Harris in low voices that didn't quite match the title they claimed. They examined the box carefully, taking photos, making notes, speaking quietly to each other as they discussed the markings and the mechanism inside. Walter stayed back, watching, trying to read their faces for any hint of what they knew, but their expressions remained professional, controlled. Finally, one of them, a man with graying hair and sharp eyes, turned to Walter. "You found this?" Walter nodded. "Yes, sir. Pulled it up on a rope near the drop." The man studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You did the right thing. We'll take it from here." Walter wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but something in the man's eyes told him it would be useless. Instead, he stepped back as they prepared the box for transport, securing it in a padded container before loading it into their vehicle. As they drove away, the weight of the box's absence settled into the station, leaving a hollow feeling in its wake. Walter stood with Harris and Rivera, watching the taillights disappear down the road, the sound of the engine fading into the cold air. "Think we'll ever find out what that was?" Rivera asked quietly. Harris shook his head, his eyes still on the road. "Maybe, maybe not." Walter didn't say anything. He turned, looking back toward the lake, the water calm and silent in the morning light, as if nothing had happened, as if it hadn't just given up a secret that could change everything. And maybe that was the truth of it. The lake didn't care. It would hold its secrets until someone was brave, or foolish, enough to pull them up, and even then, it would keep the rest hidden beneath its depths, waiting. Walter went back to his boat that afternoon, rowing out into the lake, letting the silence and the cold air wrap around him as he drifted near the drop, looking down into the dark water. He thought of the rope, the tension he had felt, the way it had pulled back as if alive, and he wondered, what else was down there, tied to the bottom, waiting to be found? If you were Walter, would you have pulled that rope up from the dark water, knowing it might change everything? Or would you have left it, letting the lake keep its secrets forever? Let me know what you would have done down in the comments. And don't forget to hit the like button if this story made you think twice about what might be hiding beneath the surface of your favorite lake. Subscribe if you want to hear more real-life stories of fishermen who discover things they were never meant to find. And share your thoughts on what you think was really inside that box. Do you believe it was part of a lost military project, or something else entirely that was hidden away for a reason? I'm curious to see what you think. Walter returned to the lake the next morning, rowing out before dawn while the mist still lay thick over the dark water, curling around the edges of the boat like cold, pale fingers. The oars creaked in the locks, breaking the silence in slow, steady beats, the sound echoing softly across the water. The lake seemed unchanged, its surface calm and unreadable, but Walter could not shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the lake itself was aware of what he had pulled from its depths. He anchored near the drop, the place where he had found the rope, and let the boat drift slightly, the cold air sharp against his face. He peered down into the dark water, the reflection of the pale sky shifting with each ripple, trying to see beneath, trying to glimpse the secrets the lake still held. As the sun rose slowly, burning away some of the mist, Walter felt the weight of what had happened settle deeper into his mind. The box was gone, taken by men who spoke in clipped sentences and hid their true purpose behind polite nods and carefully chosen words. But the questions remained, and the lake, silent and deep, offered no answers. Later that day, Harris called him to the station. Walter found him sitting at his desk, a file open in front of him, a deep crease between his brows as he read the pages inside. He looked up as Walter entered, gesturing for him to sit. "They sent us a report," Harris said quietly. "A partial one, at least." Walter leaned forward, his eyes scanning Harris's face for any hint of what he might say next. "It was a piece of specialized equipment," Harris continued, glancing down at the file. "A type of sonar device used during World War II, experimental from what they can tell. It was designed to detect submarines, but only a few prototypes were made before the project was scrapped. They think it might have come from a test flight or a transport plane that was lost during a storm in the 40s. Walter blinked, the words sinking in. "A lost plane? Here?" Harris nodded. "There are records of a transport going down in the region during that time. Bad weather, heavy fog, and no clear records of where it went down. They think the device was on that plane, and somehow it ended up tied down there." Walter sat back, trying to process it. The device, the rope, the resistance he had felt as he pulled. It all connected, but it didn't explain everything. Why was it tied with a rope as if someone had tried to retrieve it and failed, leaving it hidden at the bottom of the lake for decades? "They're not telling us everything, are they?" Walter asked, his voice low. Harris looked at him, then away, staring out the window toward the lake. "No, I don't think they are." And they sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation heavy in the small room. The air felt thick, and the distant sound of the lake lapping against the dock was the only reminder that the world outside was still moving. "What happens now?" Walter asked finally. "They're sending a team to scan the lake," Harris replied. "They want to see if there's more down there, parts of the plane maybe, or other equipment." Walter nodded, his mind already turning to the lake, to the dark water hiding its secrets beneath the cold, silent surface. He could almost see the outlines of the wreckage, resting in the silt, untouched and unseen, waiting for someone to pull it from the depths. That night, Walter couldn't sleep. The wind outside rattled the windows, and the shadows in the corners of the cabin seemed to move with a life of their own. He kept seeing the rope, the way it had pulled back, the tension humming through the boat as if the lake itself had been resisting him, trying to keep its secrets hidden. Early the next morning, Walter went back to the lake. He launched his boat in the dark, the sky barely beginning to lighten in the east, and rowed out toward the drop. He let the boat drift, the water calm beneath him, and stared down into the darkness, searching for any sign of what lay below. As the sun rose, casting pale light across the lake, Walter felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The lake was the same as it had always been, silent and deep, its surface hiding the secrets of what lay beneath. But Walter knew now that it was not empty, that beneath the calm water were stories waiting to be found, pieces of history hidden in the cold, dark depths. A week later, the team arrived with their equipment, setting up near the dock with scanners and underwater drones, their movements precise and practiced, their faces serious as they prepared to map the depths of Lake Crescent. Walter watched from a distance, standing near his boat, his arms crossed as he observed the screens showing the outlines of the lake's bottom, the shapes and shadows that moved slowly across the monitors. Hours passed as they scanned the lake, the drone cameras moving silently through the cold water, the screens showing rocks, tree branches, and the dark silt of the lake bed. Then, as the drone moved near the drop, something appeared on the screen, a shape, large and metallic, half buried in the mud, its edges jagged and dark. The team leaned in, the tension in the air growing as they adjusted the cameras, focusing on the shape. Walter moved closer, his eyes fixed on the screen as the image became clearer. It was a part of an aircraft, the metal corroded but unmistakable, the frame bent and twisted from impact. The camera moved along the wreckage, revealing more pieces, parts of the fuselage, and what looked like the remnants of cargo containers, their edges eaten away by rust and time. Walter felt a chill move through him as he watched, the reality of what lay beneath the lake's surface settling into his mind. The stories of the lost plane were true, and now, piece by piece, the lake was giving up its secrets. The team continued to scan, mapping the wreckage, marking the locations, and taking samples of the silt and water around the site. They worked with quiet efficiency, their faces calm but focused, their voices low as they discussed what they were finding. At the end of the day, as the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the team packed up their equipment, their faces tired but satisfied. One of them, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Carter, approached Walter as he stood by his boat. "You're the one who found the rope, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Walter nodded. "Yeah." She smiled slightly. "You found something important. This wreck could help us understand more about what happened during that time. You've given these men and their story a chance to be remembered." Walter nodded again, his eyes drifting toward the lake. "Just feels like the beginning, you know?" Dr. Carter followed his gaze, the water darkening as the light faded. "It is." That night, Walter sat on the dock, the cold wood beneath him, the stars reflecting on the surface of the lake. He thought about the wreckage, the rope, the box, and the long years the lake had kept its secrets hidden. And he wondered, what else was down there, waiting to be found? If you were out there, on that lake, and you saw a rope floating in the water, would you pull it up, knowing it might change everything you thought you knew about the world around you? Or would you leave it, letting the lake keep its secrets, hidden away beneath the cold, dark water? Let me know down in the comments what you would have done. Would you have pulled it, or would you have let it be? And if you've ever experienced something strange while out fishing or exploring near the water, share your story below. I'd love to hear it. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about mysterious disappearances, hidden discoveries, and the secrets waiting to be found in the world around us, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Your support helps us keep sharing these true stories of the unexplained, and it lets us know you want more stories just like this one. And remember, sometimes the lake gives up its secrets, but only to those who dare to pull the rope. The following days at Lake Crescent felt heavier, as if the water itself was adjusting to the new reality of what had been found beneath its cold surface. Walter noticed it in the way the mist lingered longer in the mornings, in the hush that settled over the lake at dusk, in the way the ripples seemed to pause when the wind died for a moment, as if the lake was breathing. The team continued their work quietly, bringing in divers who slipped beneath the surface with bright lights and cameras, vanishing into the dark water for long stretches, while Walter sat in his boat, drifting nearby, waiting, listening. Sometimes the divers would break the surface with heavy breaths, glancing back at the lake before hauling themselves into the boat, their faces pale and their eyes distant. They found more pieces of the wreck, a twisted section of the fuselage with faded numbers barely visible beneath algae and rust, a piece of a wing that had become a reef for small fish, a cracked crate containing metal cylinders with markings no one wanted to discuss openly, Each discovery was carefully documented, recorded, and lifted from the depths, inch by inch, the lake giving up its secrets reluctantly. One morning, as Walter prepared his boat near the dock, Dr. Carter approached, her expression calm but her eyes carrying the weight of sleepless nights. She stood for a moment, watching the lake with him before speaking. "There's something else down there," she said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. Walter turned, studying her. "What do you mean?" She looked at him, her brow furrowing. "The divers found a sealed container deeper than the wreck. Heavy, reinforced. We couldn't get it open down there. We're bringing it up today." Walter felt a coldness seep into his chest, remembering the tension on the rope, the feeling that something had been pulling back, not wanting to let go. He simply nodded, pushing his boat into the water, following the research team as they moved toward the drop. The crane they used was larger this time, secured to a sturdy barge that floated above the site. The divers descended, disappearing into the green-black water as the team monitored the screens, their faces tight with anticipation. Minutes turned into an hour, the radio crackling occasionally with updates, each message clipped and precise. Then, the cable on the crane went taut, the winch groaning as it began to pull something heavy from the depths. Walter stood near the edge of his boat, watching as the water churned, bubbles rising, the surface trembling as if something below was resisting, even now. Slowly, the top of a dark, barnacle-encrusted container broke the surface, water cascading down its sides, algae trailing like seaweed in the cold air. It was large, nearly the length of a man, with reinforced edges and a locking mechanism that looked military, industrial, and final. They moved it onto the barge with a heavy clang, the sound echoing across the lake, making the birds along the shoreline take flight in sudden alarm. The team gathered around it, water pooling on the deck, their breath visible in the cold air as they examined the seals and the markings on its sides. Dr. Carter knelt, brushing away algae with a gloved hand, revealing a set of numbers and a faded emblem that Walter recognized immediately. The same eagle clutching arrows that had been on the box he had pulled up. Her eyes met Walter's, unspoken understanding passing between them. "This was meant to stay hidden," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. They worked carefully, using tools to loosen the seals without damaging whatever lay inside. The tension was thick, the cold air sharp in Walter's lungs as he watched, waiting, the lake silent around them as if it too was holding its breath. Finally, with a slow metallic groan, the seals gave way and the container opened. Inside was darkness, layers of heavy cloth, tarred and preserved, wrapping something solid, angular. They pulled the layers back, the scent of oil and old metal rising in the cold air, strong enough to make some of the team step back. And then they saw it. It was a device complex and unfamiliar, its metal surface etched with warnings and codes, its construction meticulous and severe. Small dials were set into its sides, and coiled wires were fused into connectors that no one could immediately identify. It looked like it had been designed to listen, to monitor, to watch. It was a piece of surveillance technology, but older than anything Walter had seen, yet advanced for its time. "What is it?" one of the team members whispered. Dr. Carter didn't answer immediately, her fingers tracing the markings, her eyes scanning the codes before looking up at Walter. "It's a listening device," she said finally. "Long range. Submarine detection, maybe, or something else. Whatever it is, it was secret, very secret." They stood in silence, the water dripping from the container onto the deck, mixing with the cold air in quiet splashes. Walter felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. The rope, the resistance, the box, the wreck, and now this device. It was as if the lake had held onto these secrets for decades, letting them rest in the darkness until someone disturbed the water, until someone pulled the rope. Dr. Carter closed the container carefully, securing it as the team prepared to transport it away, back to wherever these things go when they are too important to be explained to the public. Walter knew he would likely never know the full truth, that the device would disappear, becoming another story hidden behind locked doors and classified files. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Carter turned to Walter once more. "You did something important here," she said, her voice steady. "But sometimes important things come with a price." Walter nodded, the weight of her words sinking into him. "I just pulled a rope." She smiled faintly, sadness in her eyes. "Sometimes that's all it takes." That evening, Walter returned to the lake alone, rowing out toward the drop as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in deep reds and purples. The water was calm, the surface reflecting the colors of the sky, the silence wrapping around him like a heavy blanket. He let the boat drift, staring down into the water, the darkness beneath the surface swallowing the light. He thought of the rope, the box, the device, the secrets hidden in the lake for so long, and he realized that the lake would always hold more secrets, that for every rope pulled, there were 100 more waiting in the darkness, tied to stories no one was ready to hear. As the stars began to appear above, Walter dipped his hand into the cold water, feeling the chill move up his arm, reminding him of the depth, the weight, the history resting below. He pulled his hand back, letting the water drip from his fingers, listening to the ripples as they moved across the surface. The lake was quiet again, as if nothing had happened, as if it had not just given up secrets that could change how people saw this place forever. Walter looked out across the water, the cold air sharp, the world silent, and wondered, what else is waiting down there, tied to the darkness, holding its breath for someone brave or foolish enough to pull the rope and bring it into the light? If you were out on that lake, alone in the early dawn, and you saw a rope drifting in the water, would you pull it, knowing that what you find could change everything you believe about the world around you? Or would you leave it, letting the water keep its secrets buried in the deep? Let me know down in the comments, what would you do? And if you enjoyed this story of a fisherman who found a rope floating in the lake, only to discover a secret that had been hidden for decades, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story waiting to be told. Every week, we uncover real stories of the unexplained, disappearances, and hidden mysteries that reveal just how much we still don't know about the world we think we know so well. Comment below if you've ever experienced something strange while fishing or exploring near the water, or if you have your own theory about what else could be hiding at the bottom of lakes like Crescent. And remember, sometimes all it takes is one rope, floating quietly in the water, waiting for you to pull it, to uncover a story the world was never meant to find. Are you ready to pull the next rope with us? Like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications, and we will see you in the next story.